that one who never hates any being and is friendly and compassionate to all, who is free from the feelings of I and mine, and even-minded in pain and pleasure, who is forbearing, ever content, and steady in contemplation, who is self-controlled and possessed of firm conviction, and who has consecrated his mind and understanding to me, dear to me, is the one who is thus devoted to me. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. In the verse we've just heard and following verses in chapter 12 of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna enumerates the virtues that make one exceedingly dear to the Lord. In his commentary, Swami Nikhilananda says that as a result, these virtues, quote, should be cherished by all seekers of liberation and those who wish to enjoy the supreme blessedness. If you were going to be known by one virtue, one quintessential, admirable character trait that defined your life, what would it be? For Martin Luther, it was faith. For Paul Tillich, courage. For Abraham Lincoln, humility. For Winston Churchill, resolve. For St. Teresa, trust. For Benjamin Franklin, industry. For Nelson Mandela, fortitude. If you were going to shape your life to exemplify one shining form of goodness, what would it be? Is it even possible in today's world to relate to virtues like these? There's been a great deal written about the loss of traditional virtues in our culture, such as the decline of civility in our communities and politics. In a paper in the Journal of Positive Psychology, twin researchers Palin and Salen Kesabir looked at the appearance and frequency of words related to moral excellence and virtue in Google American books from 1901 to 2000. They looked at 50 virtue words like honesty, patience, honor, kindness, sincerity, courage, generosity, mercy, wisdom, humility. They found a statistically significant reduction in the use of 74% of these words. So exactly what does this mean? Quote, simply, fewer virtue words in books means that the concepts those words stand for are less a part of the individual and societal consciousness. Quote, people simply do not think, talk, write about morality and virtue as much anymore, the Kesabirs write. Our findings suggest that during the 20th century, moral ideals and virtues have largely waned from the public conversation. Does this mean that we are less virtuous now than people used to be? Perhaps, though that can't be concluded simply from a study of word usage. And there certainly has been some concern that Google's later English books are too heavily weighted toward the medical and scientific. We do know, though, that many young people simply have not been brought up to think seriously about morality and virtues. As a result, they lack the vocabulary to do so. It's difficult to value or emulate a virtue if you can't easily define or discuss it. Today, we're going to help that discussion along, at least here at Vedanta, by spending a whole hour on the forgotten virtue of forbearance. In 1898, only 12 years after Ramakrishna's passing, the great Orientalist Max Muller published Ramakrishna, His Life and Sayings. Based on first-hand evidence from Swami Vivekananda and other witnesses, it was one of the very first works on Ramakrishna by a Western scholar. The book contains 395 sayings, all succinctly expressed in short, numbered paragraphs. In saying 111, Ramakrishna says, quote, "In the Bengali alphabet, no three letters are alike in sound except the three sibilants, which we can spell SSA, SHA, and SA, meaning forbear, forbear, forbear. This shows that even from our childhood, we are made to learn forbearance in our very alphabets. The quality of forbearance is the highest importance to everyone," end quote. Although most of us don't have the advantage of growing up with the Bengali alphabet, which has forbearance built in, we can still heed Ramakrishna's admonition that it is of the highest importance for all of us. Forbearance is kind of the Rodney Dangerfield of virtues, if you're old enough to remember that comedian and actor whose catchphrase was, "I don't get no respect." Forbearance doesn't get any respect either. It's not as appealing as kindness or truthfulness because it implies putting up with something we'd probably rather not put up with. It implies enduring. When we think of forbearance, we usually think of begrudging acceptance. And in today's society, people often mistake forbearance for cowardice, when in reality, as we will discuss today, forbearance can demonstrate exceptional wisdom. The Encarta Dictionary gives two meanings for the verb forbear. Number one, hold back from something, to not do or say something that you could do or say, especially when this shows self-control or consideration for the feelings of others. Number two, be tolerant, to tolerate something with patience or endurance. Both of these meanings fit nicely with Ramakrishna's teaching, which serves to remind us of the value of forbearance in our daily lives. I think we're all aware of the desirability of not saying the unkind word or not doing the unkind deed, or of being patient when we are tempted to be reactive, but we often forget to put this into practice. It's for that reason that I chose forbearance as the topic of this lecture, as a reminder to myself and all of us of a very important and desirable behavior that has significant spiritual benefits. Samuel Johnson said, "People need to be reminded more often than they need to be instructed." Most of us know the right things to do, we just don't put them into practice. So this morning, we will remind ourselves of the need and value of forbearance as a spiritual discipline, in the hopes that reminder will spur us into practice. When Ramakrishna said sha, 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 using the three Bengali consonants, he used the repetition for greater emphasis by punning the fact that the consonants sound exactly the same, although they are written differently. At the conclusion of many Vedic prayers, peace, peace, peace is said 3 times. This is not done for emphasis, but because each repetition appeals for peace in a different realm. First, in our own internal realm, second, in the realm of the physical world, and third, in the divine realm. It's good to remember these when we say peace, peace, peace. So another interpretation of sha, sha, sha I'd like to suggest is that the 3 iterations, like the peace mantras, indicate different aspects of forbearance as well. For the sake of this discussion, we will say the 3 are: forbear to be patient, forbear to forgive, and forbear to be kind. If we can at all times be patient, be forbearing, be forgiving, be compassionate, then we are forbearing in the highest sense. When something difficult or negative happens to us, we can broadly characterize our reactions as either negative or positive. Negative reactions in one form or another are probably the kind that most of us can relate to. They could take a whole range of possibilities, from mild dismay, of course accompanied by appropriate facial expressions such as a smirk or an eye roll, to real sorrow or anger, which may manifest in a great number of ways, both hidden and obvious, and finally to extreme reactions that may be threatening to ourselves or others, such as depression, rage, or hysteria. Regardless of the type of negative reaction, this is not where we want to be. The other possibility is a positive reaction, where we're able to take a potentially upsetting situation, accept it positively, and produce a desirable result instead of a negative one. This is the approach suggested by the proverbial saying, "When life gives you lemons, make lemonade." The Bible clearly states the two reactions when it says, "A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger." Since we're emphasizing forbearance, not only as an everyday virtue, but as a spiritual practice, we'll try to explore what we can do to move toward a consistently positive response. Although it was Ramakrishna's teaching to forbear, 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 others around him made similar statements. Holy Mother said, "There is no wealth equal to contentment and no quality equal to forbearance." In fact, her life may be one of the best examples of forbearance we can possibly find. If we accept Sarada Devi's divine nature, which is confirmed by Ramakrishna and his disciples, it should be no surprise that she showed divine patience and forbearance. In a paradox to our understanding, Ramakrishna and Holy Mother were completely divine, while at the same time being completely human. There's a natural tendency for us to compare ourselves to the human aspect, while not being able to fully comprehend the divine. So it is certainly appropriate to try to emulate the behaviors of divine personalities as they set the gold standard by which everyone else can be measured. By studying a divine life such as Holy Mother's, we can begin to understand the exemplar in the hopes of applying at least some of that behavior in our own lives. With a picture of perfect forbearance, we are reminded how to forbear ourselves, even if we are not nearly as successful. During the approximately 10 years Holy Mother lived at Dakshineswar, most of it was spent in a small, windowless room on the first floor of the Nahabat. The room was no more than 50 square feet and was not only Mother's bedroom, but her meditation room, shrine, and kitchen storage. It contained quantities of rice and vegetables, and from the ceiling often hung a pot with live fish used for Ramakrishna's meals, which might splash around all night long. Frequently, 2 or 3 women devotees of the Master would visit, and they too shared the sleeping space with Mother at night. M. wrote about this time in her life, quote, "Oh, what superhuman patience, perseverance, and self-control. Her self-sacrifice and service were incomparable." End. Yet later, Holy Mother often referred to the time she lived in the Nahabat as the best time of her life, when she was completely happy, in spite of living circumstances that would have been intolerable for the rest of us. The real trials in Holy Mother's life came, though, from her family, which may get nods of understanding from some of us. Although her parents were godly, in his biography of Holy Mother, Swami Nikalananda says, quote, "Her brothers were greedy, selfish, and quarrelsome. Her sisters-in-law jealous of one another, and her nieces always demanding." In spite of constant requests for money from her brothers, Mother tried to help them financially as much as she could. When she arranged for partition of the family estate in an attempt to pacify them, brothers Kali and Prasanna argued so much Swami Sardananda had to break them up. On another occasion, Kali and Brother Bharata almost came to blows over a fence, causing Mother to exclaim, quote, "What an illusion Mahamaya has conjured up. Here is this infinite world, and what one claims as his possession will be left behind at death. Still, people cannot understand this simple truth." Nevertheless, she always did what she could to maintain their well-being. Prasanna once had a brief glimpse of Holy Mother's real nature and said to her, quote, "Do I not see how precious you are? I see it all, but I cannot be nice to you for fear of arousing Kali's jealousy. Please bless me so that we may have you as our sister in future births as we have now, As for me, I want nothing else, end quote. Holy Mother's response was telling, quote, catch me coming to your family again. I've had enough of it this time. To come again to you, the idea. In this case, it appears Mother's forbearance applied to this life only, and that in future lives the brothers would have to take care of themselves. Mother had cared for her brothers as children, bathing them in the river, playing with them, and looking after their welfare. As she grew old, disappointingly, she found herself still caring for them rather than the other way around. Mother's patience with her sisters-in-law and nieces was truly extraordinary. They were always jealous of one another and quarreled about the pettiest things. Still, she said, quote, one must be patient as the earth, which always puts up with people's transgressions. People should behave likewise, end quote. Nikolananda noted, quote, when Mother's forbearance reached its limit, she would say about her family, I'm like a lotus in the midst of a rubbish heap. Still, she maintained, I must look after the family in which I was born. That is why I feel so intensely for my parents, my brothers, sisters-in-law, and nephews and nieces. I owe them debts I must pay back. Why, otherwise, should I bother about them? Patience and forbearance are frequently mentioned together as complementary virtues. Some definitions actually make the terms synonymous, but I don't think that's completely in keeping with their original meanings. What then might be the difference? Forbearance could be defined as patient self-control or restraint and tolerance under provocation. So patience is required for forbearance. Patience itself, though, is being content with waiting and not losing one's composure while doing so. There is no mention of the reason for waiting. Forbearance implies trying circumstances, provocation, and long suffering, while patience often does not. Swami Premananda, who is a beacon of kindness, gentleness, and patience, said, patience and forbearance should be our guides in life. At another time, he said, have infinite patience. To live in the world, we need to cultivate these two qualities, patience and forbearance. And finally, he said, if you want to be good and happy in this world, have patience and forbearance. Infinite patience, unlimited forbearance, and forgiveness, these alone bring peace and happiness. It is good to be reminded here that Premananda was an illumined soul who Ramakrishna said was pure to the very marrow of his bones. Certainly his advice about having infinite patience deserves our undivided attention. Let's start with a story about patience. Once Buddha was traveling with several of his disciples. Seeing a lake in the distance, they decided to stop there since they were thirsty. When they got closer, Buddha said to his youngest disciple, I'm thirsty. Can you bring me some water from that lake? The disciple went to the lake, but when he arrived, he saw a farmer and his bullocks in the shallow end where he planned to go. This disturbed the water, which became brown and muddy. The disciple thought, I can't give this muddy water to the teacher. So he went back and told Buddha, the water is very muddy. I don't think we can drink it. About half an hour later, Buddha again asked the disciple to go back to the lake and bring him some water to drink. However, the water was still a muddy brown. The disciple returned, saying to Buddha, we can't drink that water. We should walk to the town to get something to drink. Buddha didn't answer. He didn't make any attempt to move either. He just stayed where he was. After a while, Buddha asked the disciple once again to go back to the lake and bring him water. The disciple went to the lake as he didn't want to challenge his master. But he was upset because he didn't understand why Buddha had asked him to go back again. Since the water was obviously muddy, they couldn't drink it. When the disciple arrived at the lake this time, he saw that the water now looked crystal clear. So he collected some and brought it to Buddha. Buddha looked at the water and said to the disciple, "What have you done to clean the water?" The disciple didn't understand the question. It was obvious that he hadn't done anything. The Buddha looked at him and explained, "You waited and let it be. Therefore, the mud settled on its own, and now the water is clear. Your mind is like that too. When it's muddy, you have to let it be. Give it some time. Don't be impatient. On the contrary, be patient. It will reach a balance on its own. You don't have to make any effort to calm it down. Everything will pass on its own as long as you don't hold on to it." Like the clearing of the muddy water, our affairs in life will often clear themselves if we have the patience to wait and not expect and hold on to an immediate result. The virtue of patience is not only recognized by all the major religions, but by studies showing good things indeed come to those who wait. Among the findings, number 1, patient people enjoy better mental health. Patient people rate themselves as more mindful and experiencing more gratitude. They also feel more connection to humanity and to the universe, and a greater sense of abundance. Recognizing 3 different types of patience, those more patient toward others tend to be more hopeful and more satisfied with their own lives. People who can patiently and courageously endure life's hardships also exhibit more hope. And people who show patience over daily hassles are more satisfied with life in general and less depressed. Number 2, patient people are better friends and neighbors. Quote, "In relationships with others, patience becomes a form of kindness. Think of the best friend who comforts you night after night over the sorrow or heartache that just won't go away, or the grandchild who smiles through the story she has heard her grandfather tell countless times. Indeed, research suggests that patient people tend to be more cooperative, more empathic, more equitable, and more forgiving. Patience involves emphatically assuming some personal discomfort to alleviate the suffering of those around us," wrote 2 of the researchers. We certainly see that in Holy Mother's life. All 3 types of patience we mentioned were associated with higher agreeableness, a personality trait characterized by warmth, kindness, and cooperation. The interpersonally patient people even tended to be less lonely, perhaps because making and keeping friends, with all their quirks and slip-ups, generally requires a healthy dose of patience. Quote, "Patience may enable individuals to tolerate flaws in others, therefore displaying more generosity, compassion, mercy, and forgiveness," wrote the researchers. This is a nice confirmation for those of us who believe we have some degree of patience. But what if we want to enhance our patience or consider ourselves patience-challenged? Another study by one of the same researchers asked undergraduate students, quote, "to participate in 2 weeks of patience training, where they learn to identify feelings and their triggers, regulate their emotions, empathize with others, and meditate. In 2 weeks, participants reported feeling more patient toward the trying people in their lives, feeling less depressed, and experiencing higher levels of positive emotions." These studies, as well as the Buddha story, suggest 3 things we can do to strengthen our patience and control our impatience. First, we need to recognize when we're getting impatient and what is causing it. We probably already know circumstances that try our patience, whether it's traffic jams, long lines at the grocery, being stuck on phone hold, or having to listen to someone talk at length about something in which we have no interest. The tendency here is to think that the problem is external to us, whereas in reality, It's in our own minds, in our response to whatever is happening around us. Swami Chaitananda says in his book on Holy Mother, it is human nature to create big problems out of petty matters. Recognizing situations that will try our patience is a good start to short-circuiting the impatience reaction and strengthening our self-control muscles, since self-control is directly related to patience. Second, we need to practice teaching ourselves to wait. If we cannot physically remove ourselves from a situation, then we should remove ourselves emotionally. The proverbial counting to 10 when angry is one way of waiting for emotion to settle. Thomas Jefferson even advised, if very angry, count to 100. We need to have ways of suspending reaction if we are impatient or angry or frustrated, so that by waiting, we have an opportunity to return to a balanced, peaceful state of mind. Though I usually think of myself as a reasonably patient person, I've realized that some of the actions I regret most came from not waiting, or not waiting long enough, so that I could come back to a centered, reflective state of mind before I said or did anything. There's a great deal to be said for patient waiting. A study published in Psychological Science shows that waiting for things actually makes us happier in the long run. Third, we need to be here now. We need to be fully present to what is happening in this moment. Buddhism would say we need to be mindful. We shouldn't be thinking about what we've just accomplished or all the things we have to do and which of them to do next. This is a ready opportunity for impatience when we can't follow our own pre-planned agenda. Impatience often arises when we're not getting our way, usually when our expectations do not tally with reality, whether it's the speed of traffic on the highway, getting a real person on the phone, or the subject of a chatty person's monologue. We need to give up expectations of how a circumstance or person should behave, especially when it's something over which we have no control. If we can just be present in the moment and let things pass on their own, as Buddha said, we will be both happier and more patient. I'd like to add a little sidebar on kindness here before we return to our main topic, if you can forbear for a moment. Although it isn't always explicitly mentioned, kindness should be an essential part of everything we're talking about today. A part of patience, of forbearance, of forgiveness, and of compassion. Many recognize its importance in maintaining a world that is habitable and humane. Fred Rogers said, quote, "There are 3 ways to ultimate success. The first way is to be kind. The second way is to be kind. The third way is to be kind." I mentioned Fred because Laura and I are currently reading The Good Neighbor, the life and work of Fred Rogers. Last year there was both a documentary and a film starring Tom Hanks about Fred. Both are highly recommended. For those of you who didn't grow up with him, Fred Rogers' Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was the classic children's television show which ran on the public broadcasting system from 1968 to 2001. It was gentle, thoughtful, and treated kids like intelligent people who deserve programming as good as that for adults. More importantly, it was Fred Rogers' unstated ministry to children, as he was an ordained Presbyterian minister, and he absolutely lived what he believed. On every program of the neighborhood, Mr. Rogers gave an expression of care to each child, assuring them that every one of them was special. He looked directly into the camera and said that he liked them just the way they are. This was a profound idea for children's television, that each person is special and we should all care about and support each other regardless of differences. Some have described this as his radical kindness. And indeed, His whole life was full of kindnesses, big and small. Fred said that love was at the root of everything, so the kindness that flowed out of him was that love made manifest. Our problem is not that we lack the power of love, but that often we lack its application. Kindness can be that application, and Fred Rogers' whole life was about the application of kindness. We could actually say the same thing about Holy Mother and Ramakrishna. A real-life kindness story. Quote, my neighbor Jim had trouble deciding if he wanted to retire from his job in construction until he ran into a younger man he'd worked with previously. The young man had a wife and 3 children and was finding it difficult to make ends meet since he hadn't worked in some time. The next morning, Jim went to the union office and submitted his retirement paperwork. For his replacement, he gave them the young man's name. That was 6 years ago, and that young husband and father has been employed ever since. Kindness is being ready to drop your own needs for those of another. The Dalai Lama said, be kind whenever possible. It is always possible. When giving a lecture near the end of his life, author Aldous Huxley said, people often ask me what is the most effective technique for transforming their life. It is a little embarrassing that after years and years of research and experimentation, I have to say that the best answer is just be a little kinder. Let's return to Holy Mother, our exemplar in forbearance and kindness. The greatest of her family trials came from Radu, the daughter of Surabala, wife of Mother's brother Akshay, who died from cholera before Radu was born. Already unbalanced, Surabala showed increased signs of mental illness after Radu's birth, forcing Holy Mother to raise Radu. After the Master's death, Holy Mother felt an emptiness that left her wanting to give up the body. When she asked Ramakrishna why she should stay in the world, she had a vision of a young girl in a red cloth moving in front of her. Ramakrishna appeared, pointing to the girl, and said, take her as a support and live. Many spiritual seekers will come to you. Later, Holy Mother recognized Radu as the young girl in the vision, who played an important role in Ramakrishna's divine play by holding Holy Mother in the world for the good of many. As a young girl, Radu was innocent and rather charming, as well as being affectionate to Holy Mother. As she grew, though, she became eccentric, intractable, and prone to a series of physical ailments. Quote, she not only disobeyed Holy Mother at every turn, but abused her, cursed her, and in short, treated her in such a way as would have exhausted the patience of any other human being. At the age of 12, Radu was married to a young man from a neighboring village. Since she did not want to live at her husband's home, both of them stayed with Holy Mother most of the time. Though grown up and expecting a child, Radu continued to mistreat Holy Mother, who was concerned that she would become insane like her mother Surabala. For in addition to symptoms of nervous system disorder, Radu also had fits of hysteria and at times couldn't bear even slight noises. To get some relief, Holy Mother took Radu and her child to Jarambati, where Radu was more eccentric than ever and remained debilitated. The disciple's diary gives us details of this ordeal. Quote, Radu's baby was now 6 months old, but still Radu could not stand up because of weakness. She could only crawl about. To make things worse, she became addicted to opium. Holy Mother, too, of late had not been well. She was having occasional attacks of fever. She tried to wean Radu from her opium habit, but Radu was adamant. One morning, Holy Mother was cutting vegetables when Radu came for opium. Holy Mother understood her intention and said to her, Radu, you've had enough of this. Why don't you stand up? It is impossible for me to take care of you anymore. For your sake, I've given up my devotion and everything else. Can you tell me how I can possibly meet all your expenses? At these unpleasant words, Radu lost her temper, picked up a big eggplant from the vegetable basket, and threw it at Holy Mother with great force. It struck her hard, and immediately she arched her back in pain. Looking at the photograph of the Master, she prayed with folded hands, "Lord, please forgive her misdemeanor. She is senseless." And then she took the dust of her own feet, put it on Radu's head, and said, "Radi, the Master even hurt me, even with a rude word, and you torture me so much. How can you understand where I really belong? Simply because I live with you all, you do not think anything of me." Radu burst into tears. Holy Mother continued, "Radi, if I get angry with you, there will be no one in the three worlds to give you shelter." Addressing Sri Ramakrishna, she said, "O Master, please do not be offended with her." Even after physical abuse, Holy Mother prayed forgiveness for Radu. Although the dictionary definitions don't mention it, there is an implication in forbearance that it may be related to injustice, that a wrong done to us might give us justification to criticize or seek retribution. Instead, by taking the higher path of forbearance, we can respond with forgiveness instead. Indeed, there's a lot of forbearance that is all about forgiveness. Unless we actively feel that the affront is not an affront at all, how can we come to a positive acceptance of the situation? The Oxford Dictionary defines forgiveness as, quote, "to grant free pardon and to give up all claim on account of an offense or debt." So forgiveness of everyone involved is an important part of forbearance. When Peter asked Jesus how many times one should forgive, Peter suggested 7 times, which he thought may have been generous, because the rabbis taught that forgiving 3 times was sufficient, since God forgave Israel 3 times. However, Jesus replied, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7, to indicate forgiveness each and every time, essentially without number." Forgiveness is very closely tied to the fault-finding Holy Mother strongly advised against. In both cases, it's very difficult to have a peaceful mind if one sees others' faults or holds on to their offenses. Swami Premananda taught, "Infinite patience, unlimited forbearance, and forgiveness. These alone bring peace and happiness." In a way, finding others' faults is similar to convicting them of an offense which we cannot forgive. In finding fault, we have made ourselves judge and jury by deciding solely by our standards how other people should behave. One of the most important characteristics of Mother's forbearance was that she accepted everyone just as they were. No judgment, no criticism, no attempt to change them to live according to her standard, just loving acceptance. Mother's cardinal teaching was to not find fault with others. But even for her, this was not always the case. She said, "Formerly people's faults appeared to my eyes also. Then with tears I prayed to the Master, 'Master, I can no longer bear finding fault.' Then only this defect left me." Even if you commit so much as a little fault after doing 1,000 good to somebody, he will be at once offended. People only look for faults. One should look for merits as well. I cannot see others' faults. I am simply not made that way. There are enough people already ready to criticize others. Surely the world will not come to an end if I refrain from doing so. People find faults in others after bringing down their minds to that level. Does anything ever happen to another if you enumerate his faults? It only injures you. This has been my attitude. Hence, I cannot see anybody's faults. If a person does a trifle for me, I try to remember that. To see the faults of others, one should never do it. I never do so. Forgiveness is tapasya, spiritual practice. Think how quick most of us are to offer opinions on how others should live their lives, in spite of teachings like Mother's and Christ to the contrary. It was stated that Mother's brothers were selfish and greedy, her sisters-in-law and nieces petty and quarrelsome. Yet to them, she was always the attentive older sister, the solicitous and caring aunt. Though she fully understood their natures, she did her best to love and accept them as they were, forbearing all difficulties they caused her. People are who they are because of their experiences in this and previous lives. Some have the blessing of the understanding that through self-effort and spiritual practice, one can improve one's behavior and raise one's consciousness. Others do not. Though we all live in the same world, every person is in a different place. Not higher or lower, better or worse, just different. The wise approach is, like Mother's, and for that matter, Mr. Rogers, to simply accept and love people as they are. There's a saying, the measure of love is compassion. The measure of compassion is kindness. Swami Rupananda wrote in his reminiscences, quote, "The crazy aunt, Surabala Radu's mother, was arranging lunch for a relative by placing a leaf plate and a glass of water on her veranda. Radu's cat sipped water from that glass, so she replaced it with another glass of water. This time also the cat sipped the water. The crazy aunt chased the cat, shouting, 'I shall kill you!' The mother was nearby. She said, 'No, one should not prevent a thirsty animal from drinking. Moreover, the cat has already touched the water.' Immediately the crazy aunt flared up, saying, 'You will not have to show your overflowing compassion to that cat. You have shown enough compassion to people. Why not reserve your kindness for human beings?' The mother gravely said, 'That person is really unfortunate who is deprived of my compassion. I don't know anyone, even an insect, who is not a recipient of my compassion.'" If the mistreatment we receive passes from aggravation into outright injury, we may be tempted to retaliate, feeling it justified since we were truly hurt. When Radu hit Holy Mother with the eggplant and caused her pain, even then Mother turned to the picture of Ramakrishna and asked him to forgive Radu. We must become so practiced in forbearance that even after significant mistreatment, we are not tempted to retaliate and instead respond with forgiveness and compassion. One day Radu's behavior brought Holy Mother to a state of despair. She said to a disciple, "I do not remember having committed a single sin since my very birth. I touched the Master at the age of 5. I may not have understood him at that time, but he undoubtedly touched me. Why should I suffer so much? By touching him, all the others have been freed from Maya. Why should I alone have so much entanglement? Day and night my mind wants to soar high. I force it down out of compassion for people, and yet I am so tormented." The disciple said, "Let people do whatever they like. Please bear with us all. A person cannot be angry so long as he is conscious of himself." "You are right, my child," replied the mother. "There is no greater virtue than forbearance. This is a body of flesh and blood. Sometimes I say something in a fit of anger." Of course, what Mother considered a fit of anger would be mild for the rest of us. Holy Mother took very good care of Radu's son Vanu. One of Mother's disciples was made his nurse, since most of the time Radu couldn't care for him himself. In fact, the baby's doctor would refuse to treat Vanu unless he was kept away from his mother. Holy Mother said, "She cannot even take care of herself. Why should God have given her a child?" 3 months before Holy Mother died, one evening the nurse was sent to feed Vanu after the evening worship at Udbodhan. Vanu was crying and Radu wanted to feed him, even though it wasn't quite time. When Holy Mother told Radu not to feed him, Radu's temper blazed. "I shall put fire to your mouth. Why don't you die?" Explanation that putting fire to the mouth is a death curse from the cremation practice of putting fire to the corpse's mouth first. Holy Mother's patience reached its limit after this abuse. Oh, yes, yes, you will learn what will happen to you after my death, what a plight you will be in. I do not know how many kicks and thrashings with a broomstick are in store for you. Today is the first day of the year. There was a popular belief that any wish made on New Year's Day would come true. I sincerely wish that you may die first, and then I shall follow you with a peaceful mind. The meaning here is that Radu would be taken care of through the end of her life, which was always a concern for Holy Mother. Even in a fit of pique, Holy Mother showed such concern for Radu's welfare. But Radu's abuse continued, prompting Mother to ask someone to fan her, as Nikolananda says, since her whole body burnt, as it were, from Radu's torment. Radu's place in Holy Mother's life is important for two reasons. First, the apparent attachment to Radu served to keep Mother in the world and allowed her to fulfill her part of Ramakrishna's mission. As we know, Ramakrishna said that even though she wasn't a biological mother, that Holy Mother would have so many children she would not know what to do with them. This would not have been possible without the need to care for Radu. Second, through Mother's relationships with Radu and others in her family, we are shown an ideal for practicing forbearance with patience, forgiveness, and compassion in a way that we need for carrying out our own worldly relationships and responsibilities. The Tirukural is a celebrated poem on ethics in the Tamil language written by the poet sage Tiruvallar sometime before Christ. One whole chapter is devoted to the possession of forbearance. It begins with a verse, "Just as the earth bears those who dig into her, it is best to bear with those who despise us." The second verse, asking even more than non-retaliation and forbearance, says, "It is always good to endure injuries done to you, but to forget them is even better." This is the kind of loving forbearance Holy Mother demonstrated. Externally, there was non-retaliation and loving concern, and internally, complete forgiveness with no memory of injury. If we hold on to the insults and injuries of others, it is little better than no forbearance at all. Real forbearance means forgiving and forgetting the injury as well. We've seen some positive things we can do to foster forbearance, such as acceptance and non-judgment, but it's worth mentioning things that can prove to be obstructions as well. The business community knows what objectives they need to pursue to succeed, but they also use risk analysis to identify factors that could cause failure, so they too can be addressed. In the spirit of identifying risks, here are some things that can be hindrances to our practice of forgiveness. Number one, authority. If we have positional or other authority, we may be able to tell others what to do. This can make us used to getting our own way, which can be dangerous, especially for a spiritual person's ego. This is obvious in CEOs or heads of big corporations, but you only have to be a manager or a person with authority over others to run the risk. The CEO of a huge Asian retailer said, quote, "Managing our ego's craving for fortune, fame, and influence is the prime responsibility of any leader." When you can tell people what to do, it becomes harder to treat them as equals with the same right for acceptance and forbearance we would wish everyone to give us. Why forbear when you can command? Position or authority can seriously hinder forbearance. Number two, money. I was tempted to say initially that the obstacle here was too much money, as I believe that winning a lottery ruins people's lives more often than not. But on reflection, I think it's how we regard the money and what we do with it that is the real obstacle. If we use money to get our way and to insulate ourselves from life's difficulties, we develop a sense of influence and privilege. We become accustomed to getting what we want when we want it. This tends to increase our sense of self-importance, which decreases our willingness to delay gratification and reduces our consideration of others. With an increased illusion about the amount of control we have in God's universe, we are reluctant to forbear anything. Interestingly, scientific studies confirm serious problems with being wealthy. The rich are more likely to take liberties when driving, more likely to steal than the poor, more likely to cheat than people with less money, more likely not to care about others' suffering, likely to give away less of their wealth than poorer people, more likely to manipulate people to their advantage, and more likely to let money define their happiness. There's a couple of examples. Following assigned tasks in a study, rich people took twice as much candy from a jar marked "for children only" compared to people of more modest means. People who drove luxury vehicles were 3 to 4 times more likely not to stop for pedestrians at crosswalks. One explanation for these behaviors is that rich people's feelings of entitlement and self-interest destabilize their moral compass. Money can definitely hinder forbearance. Number 3, assumptions. Another obstacle to forbearance is the tendency we all have to react based on assumptions we think are true, but may in fact not be accurate. It's the old problem of jumping to conclusions, of judging too quickly, of being impatient. Instead of being the witness and watching things unfold as they will, we act on our assumptions and lose the opportunity for forbearance. I have a good story about an assumption. When Laura and I went to India some years ago, we arrived at the Delhi airport from Chicago, and while waiting for our taxi driver, we were befriended by a talkative and well-dressed Indian man who turned out to be the India South Asia bureau chief for the Straits Times, a publication headquartered in Singapore. When he found out that we were going to Dharamsala, he mentioned having seen the Dalai Lama several times and told us a story about a woman who'd had the good fortune to sit next to the Dalai Lama on a plane. When the meal was served, the woman was aghast to see that the Dalai Lama had received the non-vegetarian dinner and was eating the meat with apparent relish. Not able to restrain her amazement, she said to him, "I thought Tibetans were vegetarians," which is generally a pretty accurate assumption. To which the Dalai Lama replied with an impish smile, "Not all Tibetans are good Tibetans." With a little research, I was able to confirm that the Dalai Lama was indeed not vegetarian, as he'd been told by his doctors to eat meat to help his recovery from hepatitis. How many things do we know or assume we know that are not really true, yet we act upon them as if they were? Assumptions hinder both patience and forbearance. Number 4, anger. Anger may be the greatest obstacle of all to practicing forbearance. Shantideva, the 8th century Buddhist master, said, "Anger is the greatest evil. Patient forbearance is the greatest austerity." We typically think of austerity as control of the mind, speech, and body in the pursuit of spiritual goals, the kind of things that monks and nuns do. So for Shantideva to say that forbearance is the greatest austerity is significant and indicates how difficult he thought it was to practice, and yet how important. People's inability or unwillingness to forbear anger can be the source of a variety of unfortunate behaviors, including damage to relationships, community or family violence, abuse, shootings, and road rage. The uncontrolled expression of anger can also start an unfortunate chain of events. The Bhagavad Gita says, "From anger comes delusion, from delusion, the loss of memory, from the failure of memory, the ruin of discrimination, and from the ruin of discrimination, the person perishes. Must be explained here that by the phrase the person perishes, commentators say it doesn't mean death, but failure to attain the spiritual goal or moral degradation. I want to tell you another Buddha story, which nicely answers the question of what happens to anger met with a soft answer in forbearance. One day the Buddha and a large number of followers, monks and nuns, were passing through a village. The Buddha chose a large shade tree to sit beneath so the group could rest a while out of the heat. He often chose times like these to teach, and so he began to speak. Soon, villagers heard about the visiting teacher, and many gathered around to hear him. One surly young man stood to the side, watching as the crowd grew larger and larger. To him, it seemed that there were too many people traveling from the city to his village, and each had something to sell or teach. Impatient with the bulging crowd of monks and villagers, he shouted at the Buddha, "Go away! You just want to take advantage of us. You teachers come here to say a few pretty words and then ask for food and money." But the Buddha was unruffled by these insults. He remained calm, exuding a feeling of loving kindness. He politely requested that the young man come forward. Then he asked, "Young sir, if you purchased a lovely gift for someone, but that person did not accept the gift, to whom does the gift belong?" The odd question took the young man by surprise. "I guess the gift would still be mine because I was the one who bought it." "Exactly so," replied the Buddha. "Now, you have just cursed me and been angry with me. But if I do not accept your curses, if I do not get insulted and angry in return, these curses will fall back upon you, the same as the gift returning to the owner." The young man clasped his hands together and slowly bowed to the Buddha. It was an acknowledgement that a valuable lesson had been learned. And so the Buddha concluded for all to hear, "As a mirror reflects an object, as a still lake reflects the sky, take care that what you speak or act is good, for goodness will always cast back goodness, and harm will always cast back harm." We've looked at forbearance from a number of angles, including how to promote it and what can be obstacles to its practice. But what is forbearance worth if it only means surviving a lot of grief from others? Why should we put up with so much just to be more agreeable and to have better mental health and relationships? Are the benefits worth the significant efforts to forbear? To answer that question, we really need to be honest with ourselves about why we're in spiritual life in the first place. Are we seriously interested in progressing along the path toward realization, or do we just want to spend a little time in peaceful meditation and reading some interesting books? Are we really interested in changing ourselves in a Godward direction? In Swami Paramananda's Daily Thoughts and Prayers, the January 23rd entry says, quote, "The thoughts we think steadily create our atmosphere. People who are soaked in the world have occasional noble thoughts, but they do not think them often enough to produce an enduring effect on their atmosphere. It is only in living the life we create what endures. Spirituality becomes a factor only when we live and serve our ideal faithfully. Our whole existence must be shaped by it. Then alone will our life be productive of good." Practicing forbearance is not only an excellent way of showing that we take spiritual life seriously, but of gradually wearing away the parts of us that do not resemble God. This is like the classic question, how do you carve an elephant? Answer, start with a block of stone and remove everything that doesn't look like an elephant. Forbearance is not about who or what we put up with. It's about changing ourselves. We're all familiar with the Serenity Prayer, which was actually written by the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr in the 1930s. It's used by Alcoholics Anonymous and other self-help groups. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. A variation that I like better also came from someone in AA. God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know it's me. When difficulties arise, the wise person begins within himself, not outside. The father of a high school friend of mine was a rock hound, which was easy to be in Oregon, where there are plenty of good rocks between the Cascade Mountains and the coastline of Pacific beaches. Most agates that collectors appreciate are not very pretty in their natural state, so they need some work to expose their intrinsic beauty. My friend's father had built his own tumbler, which consisted of a drum connected to a belt-driven gear so it could be turned by a small motor. The drum was accessed by a small door on its side, into which you put any rocks to be tumbled, along with an abrasive and water. The whole procedure might take as long as 4 to 6 weeks, moving progressively from coarser to finer abrasive grits. After weeks of constant tumbling, all the rough edges were worn off, and the collector quality gems that emerged were pleasingly smooth and richly colored, each one a thing of beauty. Practicing forbearance is like the rock tumbling. Over a period of time, it wears off the rough edges of our personality and ego, letting more of the divine within shine through. With continued practice, we become more patient and more forbearing, less likely to be thrown off balance by whatever the world throws at us, and more willing to see the long-term view as we move toward our divine birthright. It's not quick, but it's highly effective. Thomas Erskine of Linlathen, a 19th century lay theologian, nicely describes the need for patience in a cosmic sense. Quote, "We are evidently in the midst of a process, and the slowness of God's processes in the material world prepares us, or ought to prepare us, for something analogous in the moral world, so that at least we may be allowed to trust that he who has taken untold ages for the formation of a bit of old red sandstone may not be limited to 80 years and 10 for the perfecting of a human spirit." The greater the number of disciples and devotees, the more Holy Mother's troubles increased. But the compassionate mother was the embodiment of forbearance and forgiveness. She took the pain and suffering of her children upon herself. Sometimes she lamented, "Master, I can't bear any more burdens." But she did forbear more, every time. Satyendranath Majumdar left this eyewitness account of Holy Mother's forbearance. Quote, "Some afternoons I was entrusted with the task of lining up the devotees who wanted to visit the mother at Udbodhan House. Some eccentrics pestered the mother. I saw an elderly man crying loudly and bumping his head in front of the mother. I noticed another person begin to tell his life story to her without caring that other people were waiting in line. Again, someone put his head on the feet of the mother and remained there motionless. Another day, a man lay down in front of her and requested her to place her foot on his chest and awaken his consciousness right then and there. It was extremely difficult to make them understand or to stop their importunate demands. Sometimes I was irritated, observing their childish emotions, and at other times I could not control my laughter, watching their immature behavior. One day when I joked about those people in front of the mother, she said to me, 'My son, when you grow up, you will understand how much pain these distressed people carry in their hearts. You are not a mother.'" Swami Chaitananda wrote, "As a swan swims in the water, but becomes dry the moment it shakes its wings on dry land, Holy Mother lived in the midst of her family circle, yet remained free, like a Paramahamsa, a supreme swan. Of course, like regular householders, she cried and smiled, and she suffered from worries and anxieties, grief and pain, and financial and physical problems. In addition, she faced abuse and was beset by demands from close relatives. Still, she maintained her calm and serenity, forbearance and forgiveness, love and compassion. If we can practice the same quiet, loving forbearance that Holy Mother had for her family and all of her many children, we can remain unshaken by the inevitable blows of the world. The person who can forbear through all difficulties alone is triumphant in the end. May we all learn to be more patient, more forgiving, more compassionate, and more able to follow Ramakrishna's teaching of Sha, Sha, Sha. Forbear, forbear, forbear. That is my prayer for all of us today. May all beings be happy and peaceful. May no harm come to any. May all have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. May all realize the Supreme Self shining within as the innermost self. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.